started. I like as a moderator. I've been nominated for it right now. Well, I'm Alejo. I'm the owner of Gigamesh, one of the people, crazy people organizing all that. And here we have to speak about what has science. Well, does the title of the panel is "Does Science Fiction Prevent a Bad Future?" To speak about it, we have here John Clute. For those of you who don't know, he's the master of the encyclopedia. Beware with him. Susana Vallejo, she's a Spanish writer based here in Barcelona. And you are, yours is more complicated. You present yourself.
My name is Dalibor Perkovic. I'm a Croatian writer in my free time because there are no professional writers in Croatia. Well, the reason I'm here is probably because...
Nor in Spain.
Okay. We have an excuse. There are only 4 million of us. What is yours? Anyway, I'm probably here because somebody asked me if I would be willing to participate in some kind of panel. I said, yes. What are you interested in? I said, politics. Okay. So that was it.
Well, yesterday we were in a panel about science fiction and politics. That's somehow related. These days, one of the interviews that went into the media from Brandon Sanderson, in the interview he spoke of 1994, the novel. And he said, I like it, even if it's a pessimistic and dark novel, because it's helped to prevent a bad future for us. And that entered in direct contradiction with the only thing that I have previously thought for this panel, that it was, well, this is a meme that runs wild in the internet these days. It says, hey guys, 1984 was a novel, not how to do manual. And it seems we live in quite Orwellian times these days. And so if the main example of a strong science fiction novel that should avoid having a bad future is 1984, guys, we got a problem.
We've got a really big problem because 1984, I think it was, I don't remember very well, but I think it was the first page, maybe, of the novel. You can see the main character, and Orwell explained us that in every room there was a TV broadcasting messages from Big Brother and so on, and you cannot hide from the TV, the screen. And it's terrible, of course, that's terrible. But it's the novel, and the real world right now, the screen and the TV is not there, it's with us. And that's very terrifying because we buy this, and we buy happy this. And the new iPhone is going to cost to me my entire salary, for example, and I'm happy of buying it. So that's most terrifying than 1984, for example.
Is this live?
Yes. Yes.
Good. The example of 1984 is a pretty.
Just a sec, John. Take into account that there's a lot of non-English speaking people in the audience.
What are they doing here?
No. Just a warning. Try to speak slowly.
Right. You've now corpsed me completely. I will try to die slowly.
With intonation, if you are able.
Use the lungs.
The rain in Spain stays mainly in the plain.
Yeah, right. Okay. So here's a little bit of slow rain. 1984 is a dreadful warning novel. It is told in an SF mode, and it is possible to extract certain dire lessons from it. It's not necessarily that easy to show how we have extracted them in any practical sense. But what it really demonstrates, I think, and I think we might get into it a bit, is the fact that a science fiction novel is not normally designed, one, to predict anything, but two, to prophesize more than one thing at a time. What we have here is a situation where 1984, with the large screens on the wall, seems to prophesy the world we live in. But of course, it does not do that. It cannot prophesy a multiplicity of futures. Science fiction is not designed to be a formula, an engine to explain, to demonstrate where we live now. It cannot do that. It is a different kind of fish. We can get into that later.
Well, about this prophetic property of science fiction, there are so many different things in science fiction. Things have gone in so many directions that some of it is bound to come true.
But on the other hand, when they want to, when science fiction tries to prevent our future, well, there were some people speaking about also the importance of A Brave New World by Huxley, and arguing that we live in a crossfire. On the one hand, they are manipulating us in the way 1994 prevented us, and on the other hand, they are giving us a lot of soma. We are watching a lot of the shows, we are consuming a lot of fiction, and we are using it somehow as soma. And we're in between. It looks like if science fiction writers were giving politicians ideas, and that's not a very good idea, a very good thing to do, it seems.
First of all, I don't think that science fiction is. I don't think that politicians are actually reading science fiction. They're just.
Well, they're delaying get the idea, but it reaches them anyhow.
Well, it reaches them through. Great minds think alike. So they probably get the same ideas independently. But I don't think science fiction is preventing or anything or making anything happen. Science fiction is just a bunch of novels that can. The real effect of science fiction may be because, first of all, if you look at the whole population, only less people read books than those who don't read books. And out of those who read books, there are more of them who don't read science fiction than those who do read science fiction. So, so in the end, it's a small percentage. Some of it could, trickle down. Ideas could trickle down into the population, but science fiction isn't preventing or making anything happen. But what it can do is prepare those who do read it to be a little bit less shocked when it happens. A good example is the atom bomb. The population that did not read science fiction lived a few decades of horror of nuclear war. But people who read science fiction in the 30s and the 40s,
they were producing the horror in fiction.
But the people who read science fiction in the 30s and the 40s, when the first atom bomb went off, they said, "Oh, it happened. Cool."
So you're mainly saying that it acts as a vaccine for us readers.
It works on individual basis.
And of course, science fiction helped at around 1945, 1946 to shape the shapers' minds as regards to the inevitable coming of a Cold War between the opposing blocs that dominated the planet. Science fiction, I think we can underestimate the power of a clear-cut genre like science fiction, whose stories are agenda-based, advocacy-based. Most of the stories in American science fiction from 1930 or 40 on can be seen as part of a large-scale, loose-formed but conspicuously identifiable program for the first world to conduct its Cold War, to reinvent its positioning with regard to near space and the creation of new frontiers. And those people who read that, notoriously, are the people who became influential in the various engineering and scientific and technological programs that created the first space race, which, as we know, died for many years once it had accomplished its goal, which turned out to be not exactly scientific, not exactly technology and industry-based, but political. But all of these strands were visible in the advocacies of science fiction, which boxed way above its weight in terms of general population and general readership. It was being read by those who thought of it as a potential tool. And I think that was very interesting, and we all, I suspect, think it was pretty interesting. But at the same time, we escaped that particular era of science fiction by the skin of our teeth, because that era of science fiction was quite comfortable with winning nuclear wars, was quite comfortable with triumphing in space as we in the first world had triumphed over the various lesser races on this planet. I say that advisedly, of course.
Because science fiction is speaking about the present, not about the future. It seems to be speaking about future, but it's the present. If you are...
No, actually, you are any writer with anything he writes. If he wants to connect with a reader, he's speaking about things that matter to us now. The subject matters, and everything can have any custom, but the political problems involved, if we react to them, are whatever is happening these days.
We have now, though, a world of mission development, of mission statement. We have a world in which the future is not only coming because time passes, but because large corporations, large entities are actively creating futures that have a science fiction simplicity to them. They are continuing to do so. Much of what you're describing, the creation of the social media, has not been a spontaneous explosion of access on our parts to all the good bits of the world. It has been a much more controlled and much more plot-like and a much more science fiction-like enterprise than we might like to think. And the problem with this, over and above the fact that we think we are free, but we're actually part of mission statements, is that although science fiction stories talk about the present, because essentially you cannot talk about anything else except the past, in reality, what is happening is that science fiction stories which might be understood as recognitions of the present are actually blueprints for the creation on our behalf of various futures. And that I can assert is something we need very, very strongly to keep in mind as intellectually independent readers and viewers and inhabitants of the various intersections of the present and the future which shape us every day and shape us in various ways.
If we want to come back to the literary point of view, the other thing is that generally, fiction, the work of both at the same time, writers and readers, making popular some kind of fictions and making it evolve, it's this narrative is the way we explain ourselves. We have, as a society, as an individuals also, we need somehow to tell our story, and reality doesn't work. We construct a fiction about it and describe it, and it relates very much to the sense of the panel that whenever we define a problem or whenever we define a theme, we are at the same time we are shaping it. We are influencing. We are influencers. We are
Absolutely
part of the process of the construction of the world we figure. So in this sense, any impact science fiction has on real life, on politics, comes from this very process altogether.
And the clarity of that process. That's the terrifying thing about science fiction and about fiction in general, that science fiction, as a genre, as stories that we're familiar with, tends to be based on an SF toolkit, which is obeyed and which is violated in recognizable ways. But the consequence of the fact that science fiction is recognizable as a form, and we recognize a science fiction story when we read it, is that toolkit itself tends to generate understandable outcomes. It tends to generate linear outcomes. It tends to generate the kind of thinking that say, if you're a climate change denier, you say, well, there is no climate change because the Pacific Ocean, because the air did not get warmer for a period of 5 years. It generates the kinds of thinking, the non-patterned thinking about this world that we live in, which cannot, in the end, help us understand that world. So we have to use science fiction because of its power, but also be very, very aware of it, precisely because of its simplistic power.
Well, if you're talking about using science fiction as a tool, it's just as any tool. It can be used both ways.
Absolutely.
So when you rationalize that there is no, when people rationalize that there is no global warming, it's the Pacific, it's something, well, a lot of them think it's a conspiracy to, I don't know, make gasoline more expensive or something like that.
Conspiracies are simpler than the world, but I'm more inclined to think about conspiracies as more realistic than happenstance.
Well,
although I am, as all of us should be, very cynical about conspiracies as such.
There are psychological reasons also behind that. There was a conference this morning about how the brain cheats us and how we work to get to defend our that's anyway. It is in streaming. I recommend everyone to see that conference. It was brilliant. To lighter a bit the more, with the title of the panel, I thought of another answer. It was, does science fiction prevent a bad future? For me, it has. Science fiction had provided me a very nice future. In my case, personally.
You're talking about business, yes. Definitely.
No. I mean, and the whole science fiction community is growing and it's becoming stronger and it's very healthy and quite productive. So that I think somehow relates to the open mind that we are. Our culture is able to distance itself from the real world, and we are, as a group, we are thriving.
Maybe we have a vision, and the only thing that as readers we can do is to adapt about reality, about the reality I'm watching on TV, the reality they are trying to explain me on papers, and maybe this is our only.
It's more or less
point.
the same that you said. It works on a personal basis. It somehow helps builds your worldview, and it can immunize you for all these processes.
Prepares you for the shocks that other will suffer.
Yes. Yeah, it's like the future. The shock of the future was the name of the book. Toffler.
Yeah, future shock.
The future shock. We are more prepared to confront the future shock maybe than other sectors of the population. But we see it from a distance. Well, the people attending this convention is people that life has treated well. They are wealthy, they are able to travel. We are, that disappearing middle class, we're still in it.
One of the problems with future shock, and it's something that I myself have, as it were, intellectually lived with for many, many years, because future shock's an old book and I'm an old man. So it's been around a long time, and science fiction as an entity and science fiction editors and panelists like ourselves have regaled ourselves with specifically the fact that we are more accustomed to the future, to the possibility of something happening, than readers, viewers who have not had their eyes opened in the way we've had our eyes opened to stories which say there is a next, which is about a next happening. The negative side, of course, is that reconciles us to the future, that accustoms us to all too readily to what may be happening tomorrow or the day after tomorrow. We are like it. The future is a kind of sweet tooth for us because we have been trained to like that kind of food. Now, that does not mean that it is meaningless, but it means it is dangerous. We play with dangerous tools in a world where so much is possible at the push of a button. What we need out of our science fiction is irony, distance, a way to get a perspective on the fix we're in, not to customize ourselves to that fix. We need to be, there has to be some kind, for us, for this rump of people, some kind of know in thunder to what happens. Not, by God, I recognize this a millisecond faster than anybody else did because I read X's story. All that is, if it doesn't take it any further, if it doesn't give us a negative perspective, a precious negative perspective, all that is making you a better product of the world, not a more powerful agent of understanding or change or resistance.
Well, I have a feeling that the pessimistic stories make you more prepared for action, because when you read something that ends well, you read a novel or you get out of the cinema after you have seen or read a story that ends well, you're content and you go home ready for supper, ready to go to sleep, and that's it. But when you finish a story when you consume a story that doesn't end well, most people will feel sadness or rage, and they will be more energized to try to prevent it or to stop it from happening. So maybe that's also the answer.
It's absolutely the intention of many films and many authors to accomplish that goal, and I think that is part of what I meant when I spoke of an angle, an irony, a distance, a remove from immersion in the world, whether good or bad. If you have a bad ending which tells you it's bad because of something, as Ken Loach and
or you just feel bad because of it, because somebody died or something generally bad happened, somebody lost something.
Well, in this sense, well, I was going to be tricky now. You are both writers. Well, you are also. You have published a few fiction also.
Novel.
But no, anyhow, from the point of view of the writer, I guess anything that he fears in the future will become material to work with. And I wanted to ask
a blueprint.
Yeah, and I wanted to ask you to try to think about how you do it. How you are you conscious at some level of this kind of when you write science fiction, and especially when it's near future science fiction.
Of course.
You have write near future science fiction. That was intended for you, actually.
Of course, and I think. I would like to think more about this, because I can write near future, for example, Gracia, which was about a neighborhood in Barcelona called Sants. I was writing a story, and it was a dystopia. And after writing that story, 3 months or maybe 4 later, our neighborhood, I'm from this neighborhood, I live there, was surrounded by the police, and there were riots and there were fires, and perfectly. So sometimes you said, well, I'm of course I'm not prophetizar.
Yeah, you are not trying to prophesy.
Yes, but you see things, and the logical way of the future of these things will be that situation. So we cannot do anything but not to alert. We have to write about this, and I would like to do something more not to write.
Now that I think of it, in the panel yesterday we got a very nice example of a science fiction novel that helped a great deal prevent a bad future. It's New Model Army. New Model Army came out in 2010. It presented a future where all the network facilities produced mercenary armies, revolutionary mercenary armies that were creating havoc all over, like 1 year after the publication of the novel happened really in Spain with the Spanish Revolution with the 15N, and 1 year later replicated in the States with the Occupy movement, but with a difference. Those movements were pacifist. Maybe Adam Roberts is responsible for that. He spoke about violent movement, and the real one become softer than that. He prevented a bad future.
But the softer thing, I'm worried about this, really, because the millennials, you know, the new generations, and we, there are studies, I don't know the English word, it's an English word that marketing people are using, and it's something like slacktivism or something like this. And they say that these people is very, very, very active in social media, of course, and they want to change the world, tweeting or writing in Facebook. But
well, that also helps.
Yeah, maybe it's the first step, but it's not enough.
No, I mean, the world is whatever we think the world is. If you are active changing the general way people looks at the world, you have actually changed the world.
Yeah, I like your vision. But in Twitter, you are endogamic, absolutely endogamic. So you are...
Not so much endogamic. The contents keep... well, in the French Revolution, most people didn't read papers.
Not even Twitter.
But they have this new device called the print, and they have, for the first time in history, newspapers.
Yeah. And the Square, they have the guillotine.
No, they were far more direct. We have now we're in the chatting mode. That's a good moment to allow anyone try. We have a lot of. You were the first. We don't have a mic there.
Here.
We have no. Oh, here it is. No. Era ya. Da igual. Next you.
Okay, just because you were mentioning Twitter, we tend to forget people that are not that present in terms of media. And I was thinking immediately of Black Lives Matter. Black Lives Matter exists because there's Twitter. Black Twitter is basically every person that has not been given a voice all that much in the media, that has been able to connect to each other. And everything that's happening with Black Lives Matter is very, very much a movement that has been based on Twitter. Every time we get a picture of someone that has been shot by the police, we get it because of Twitter and social media. And this is very important to me. That's a very important element of what science can do and technology can do for movements. The Arab Spring is another very good example of how Twitter has shaped those communities. So it's not everything you need, and you definitely have to go on the streets, but it's a very important element for a lot of people that don't find a voice in traditional media. So yeah, it's not everything, but it's definitely shaping things. I mean, technology has been behind a lot of the social movement. So.
You want to answer? No, no, whatever.
Anybody can, I think. I'm happy to.
Go ahead. Go.
Oh, sorry. Right. I will look at you directly after.
Okay, yeah, I think I will be more cynic than you, I'm afraid. That there's an even deeper question that has to be asked before, so I ask the panel. Before asking if science fiction can change our society and therefore it can prevent the future, is science fiction can change the individuals? Because science fiction is not medical prescribed. You are very close-minded. You need to read this book. You choose the books that you.
Would be great.
You choose the books that you want to read. So, is this people that when the change comes are more prepared for it because they read the books, or because they are more open-minded, and that's why they read the books in the first place? What do you think about that?
The chicken or the egg? Huh?
It's the same.
It's a question about the chicken and the egg, basically.
No, because it means if you can make someone read science fiction and make him more open, then you can use science fiction to cure the closeness. If it's the opposite way, and if you give one of these politicians that you were talking, and you give them the science fiction book, and he cannot take anything from it, then you cannot use it to change the thing. So I think the difference is important.
Yeah, it's about what I said about tools. You can use tool many ways. You can use a screwdriver to fix something. You can use a screwdriver to disassemble something, or you can use a screwdriver to kill somebody. So there are many uses, and it's much more individual on the psychological level, because brain is much more complex than a screwdriver. So a lot of things can happen.
And with all the egg and chicken stories, it's the same. You can start, as a starting point, you can say, no, books pick their readers, and they seek them and find them. It's a point of view problem, actually.
Looking at the situation in Europe right now, Poland, Hungary, the UK, France, etc., and the US, it seems as though historians are actually more equipped to warn us for a bad future, because things seem to be repeating themselves. So my question is, if historians don't seem to be able to prevent a bad future, how could science fiction?
Historians, by the description of their enterprise, are not primarily engaged in changing the future. Very clearly, they're engaged in a more complex operation, obviously, in which they shape, change, articulate what has happened up to this point say, in Europe. A European historian is going to have, one would hope, a complex and at the moment perhaps a rather despairing understanding of what is happening to Europe. Which is not to say that this is not a powerful tool. A science fiction author, and many in the UK, have iterated again and again and again and again the dangers, never actually the pleasures and purities of a separation of the United Kingdom from a larger but flawed entity. The number of dystopias have been created on the basis of false exclusions of other people are innumerable, it seems, in science fiction. And they may have made some difference. They may not have made enough difference to, as it were, save our bacon in the UK, but they are different enterprises, I think. They are those enterprises, the enterprises of creating dystopian literature. They are the primary science fiction mode of scientific romance born UK writers who do not attempt to pick up American modes so as to understand the world in a different way or make adequate sales worldwide.
Well, when I saw the title of this panel formed as a question, can science fiction prevent bad future? I thought, well, this is going to be the shortest panel ever. No, it can't. Now let's go have a drink because we need it.
We thought the same.
But now, when you mentioned the events, for example, in UK and USA, I just thought of a way that how science fiction can help shape the future, because the situation is every population is heterogeneous. Is that a good word? It's always split. Yeah, it's always split through ideas. So there will always be a part of population that will not be moved. They don't read, they don't think, they just follow whatever comes first to their mind. But there will be a part of population who will read science fiction, or who will know people who read science fiction, who will read people who read science fiction, and so on. And when stuff like this happens, like Brexit or Trump or anything similar, they will be more acquainted with the situation, and it's possible that thanks to reading science fiction and knowing what may happen, they will be one step ahead of the other side, and practically they may be a little bit more successful in fulfilling their goals. while the other side is just dumb and they have no clue what they're doing. They have no clue that this happened 50 years ago. They have no clue that this was described in a number of books. I'm saying it is a possibility. It may help a little bit. Like somebody said yesterday, does this help? Well, it helps if you have scales and you have, if you put sand on one half of scales and you put one grain at a time, eventually it will tip over. Maybe, again, it's a possibility. It may not, maybe it may happen in Britain and not in USA. It may happen in USA and not in Britain. If you have many cases, maybe some of them, in some of those cases, stuff will work. But basically, it's statistical.
I have a terrible counterexample for you from American science fiction or Fantastica, which of course is the extraordinarily best-selling Left Behind series by DeHaye, which could be argued as a series of blueprints to prepare the kind of person who is emotionally attuned to that kind of novel to actually accept events that are predictive of and leading up directly to a form of rapture. The rapture may not be exactly science fiction, but the description of the rapture in those novels is absolutely useful for the imagination of someone who believes that America has been doomed and that the fire must come. Good preparation, these books.
Yeah.
Preparation is half the job done.
Yes, yes, I'd like to come back to 1984 again. When you look at 1984, the Ministry of Truth, the Ministry of Truth happened before the internet with the news management by the Bilderberg conferences, and when in Britain we have an organisation called GHQ, this is the surveillance network, and the first thing, I think it was the first thing Margaret Thatcher did when she came to power was to ban trade unions from GHQ, and that's continued. So what's happened is that the possibility of pulling the plug on the surveillance network is remote. But what we're seeing instead is hackers and whistleblowers like Anonymous and WikiLeaks. Now, who controls them? Probably, potentially, we could. The question is who WikiLeaks and Anonymous and so on are working for? Whether they're working for us or working for some other buyer, and of course they're accused of working for the Russians. And but this is the way the prediction of 1984 has worked out.
Well, if you allow me, I can put my own personal theory of how history is behaving. I personally believe that we live in an Orwellian society up to very recently. We are starting to live post-Orwellian times. And the critical thing for me is who controls information. Up to now, information was a monopoly of the big brother. And the internet has broken this monopoly. All the new turmoil, and that we are living, the style of new turmoil we are experiencing, is due to this break of the monopoly. And that allows a new kind of developments that were not possible before. And that opens expectations for the future, I guess.
Yes. The Day After Tomorrow, the movie, to me personally, is horrible Hollywood swill. But a study was made that to a lot of people, this was the first time they heard the expression climate change. So in that sense, it was a good movie. Comments?
I think one of the premises of this panel is that bad news is good news if it's understood as a lesson, as a model that we can argue with and learn from and make a different future, because we have that future, and we have this terribly simple model of a bad future, which we can pretend is a description of what will happen to us if we don't do anything, but in reality is a sort of a strobe light pointing in a direction that we don't want to go. So what we do is going to have an indeterminate effect, or indeterminate consequence from any particular story, any particular strobe. But the strobe does cast light, and it allows us to operate. It frees us to operate. I'm a little bit dubious about the end of as it were, tyranny with the end of the Orwellian age and the beginning of a freer environment. I think we were talking a bit earlier. I think you said something about your sense that this might not be a fair description of what's happening now.
We're 5 minutes to the end of the panel. We'll do one last.
Okay.
There are several people waiting. One last question, sorry. And I want to close it afterwards with a very little reflection. Go ahead.
I'm not sure to what extent can science fiction prevent bad future, but I think it can serve as a great source of inspiration for a good future. And we can see it from the very beginnings, and then from the 60s and 70s, when Arthur C. Clarke's description of telecommunication satellites was actually one of the things that inspired many people to pursue this type of exploration and business later. And the starter communication devices inspired one of the first clamshell phones by Motorola.
Well, that's
and lots of entrepreneurs like Jeff Bezos and Elon Musk are science fiction fans since childhood.
Yeah.
And they are now in space business.
That's
so
a positive.
it's just a little part of what makes our future. And we see lots of these science and technology examples, and maybe not so many of the societal examples. But I think that although it's a double-edged sword, as John mentioned, it can really help inspire us to pursue more exploration and to be optimistic about what we can achieve.
Well, again, that's a matter of tools. We keep getting new and new tools that can be used in new ways, but it all depends how we are going to use them.
And that's the bright side of the thing. But sometimes I remember when I was a child, I was thinking about this discover the space, and I was absolutely sure that now we will be in the moon, in Mars, and in the space, and we are not because of economic constrictions. So that's the bright side. I would like to see this bright future, but I think that it's not so bright.
If we've learned one thing over the last 10 or 15 years, it is that no linear model works. I think I said at the beginning of the panel, that we are in a world of constant side effect, constant consequence, which we cannot predict from single utterance, single adventures, single discoveries. And that is a world we have to cope with, and we have to cope with it on a very urgent basis, because any world which is in chaos is a world which is longing for a secret master, and we are very fearful of having a number of secret masters up there in the cloud hoping to make good product out of us. We know that. We know that we're afraid of that. This is what we have to fight.
Okay, we are out of time. We should be closing now. I wanted just to put a little reflection. As we are both, we have already, we have a lots of gray hair.
Lots of gray
the
hair.
world view is very difficult to change. And there's one lesson that young people have taught me in the recent years. As a generation, we are very worried about our privacy, about the possibility of the government spying us and being onto us. And young people have another completely different attitude. They think to believe, for some strange reason, that visibility is what protects them. And that's an idea. Thank you.